Hello there, welcome to Critical Reviews. Today, I'm taking a look at Hellboy, the Crooked Man. I never actually thought that Hellboy should have been a film, As a long-time reader of Mike Mignola's books, I always thought that the natural fit for Big Red and his friends was a TV show, kind of like a really messed up, surreal X-Files. We could follow the adventures and exploits of the agents of the Bureau of Paranormal Research and Development in a serialised form, season to season. After all, most of the source material was fit for that purpose, more often than not being in a short story format. It's difficult to do justice to the characters and their foibles in a movie, and although Guillermo del Toro's brace of movies are held up as the standard, one would have to admit that the bullish, immature daddy issues bound Hellboy is a long way away from the character depicted in the comics. Ron Perlman's charismatic performance aside, John Hurt as Professor Broom was great though. The casting in those films was, overall, very solid. The advantage of being a series would be that after you'd exhausted the somewhat limited Hellboy books, you could then expand out to the BPRD books, with its expanded roster of characters and genuinely apocalyptic events. Oh well, maybe next time. For now, they have elected to try the movie route again, this time with a tiny budget of just $20 million, less than an episode of The Acolyte. Bear that in mind as I proceed with the review. First of all though, your spoiler-free plot summary. While travelling through the Appalachian Mountains, important BPRD cargo, a giant CGI spider, escapes. While attempting to recapture it, Hellboy and the other survivor, a rookie called Bobby Joe, end up embroiled in a tale of witchcraft and must face off against a malevolent character, Crooked Man. If that sounds basic, it's because it is. The Crooked Man story is rather short and definitely doesn't feature a giant spider, sadly. Nor does it feature Bobby Joe. It's just Hellboy and Tom Ferrell traipsing around the mountains. There is a lot of expositional dialogue and the climax of the story is literally a page. Therefore, they can be forgiven for having to add some material. You can't have the only woman in a film be witches, after all. Hence, Bobby Joe is deployed. She does have her own arc and agency and moments in the film, but I'm pleased to report that there is no girl bossness here at all. She is entirely feminine. She gets scared. She has vulnerabilities and obstacles that she has to overcome. She's an actual strong woman. That's an extra point for you, right there, movie. Elsewhere, there is a load of stuff inserted about Hellboy's mother in an attempt to generate something for Hellboy to do. The problem is, it doesn't really work here, and just ends up convoluting and distracting from the main plot. The climax of the story has also been extended, again with mixed results. On a technical level, and again remembering the paltry budget, it is a mixed bag. The tone of the film is decidedly one of horror, and although there is some effective body horror employed here, the action scenes, they feel kind of flat and uninspired, and although director Brian Taylor does insert an interesting angle or perspective here or there to try and give the film a voice, it is all rather uninteresting. Certainly a long way from the frenetic mayhem of his other films like Crank. Working as an absolute detriment is the cheap use of blurred shots and harsh notes and abrupt transitions in order to try and convey that horror, leading the film to become nauseating in places rather than scary. I couldn't help but feel during these sections that it would actually look better on a small screen, and maybe it's for the best that, apart from the UK, this film has skipped a theatrical release. Hellboy himself looks okay. You can tell it's a suit, but only a few scenes where it really shows. His trademark shorts are absent, but hey, if wearing trousers saves the makeup department a few grand, you have to say it's a sound compromise. Elsewhere, the low budget means the CGI is a mixed bag. Some of it just looks outright bad, and compositing in particular looks extremely fake, especially anything done in daylight. Sometimes the dark and the shadows help the effects team out, and things are less egregious. Makeup and costuming are generally solid, and overall it does feel like effort was put into making things accurate and authentic. Where the story does follow the Crooked Man book, it is very faithful, even recreating panels exactly. The attention to detail is impressive. Though numerous tricks are used to make the most of the limited budget, and these impose some compromises, they aren't always noticeable. Performance-wise, the actors do a fairly good job, I have to say. I don't think anybody was egregiously bad. Jack Kesey brings a low word count, subdued, taciturn spin to Big Red, which some will take umbrage to, especially if comparing it to the likes of Ron Perlman's Turn. Honestly, it fits. He does some pretty good work, and I didn't have an issue with him. Jefferson White also does fine, if not particularly spectacular or memorable. He captures Tom Farrell's world-weary, resigned to loss, attitude and air quite effectively. Leah McNamara is having a blast as blonde witchy Effie Cobb. She hams it up, and her accent and drawl is a thing to behold. Likewise, Joseph Marcel as Reverend Watts is in full evangelical warrior mode. There's a little bit of unnecessary swearing that isn't normally a thing in Hellboy, but that aside, the dialogue is fine and largely true to the original story. Which brings us to Bobby Joe, played by Adeline Rudolph. She gives a subdued, borderline demure, feminine performance, adequately portraying the desk-bound rookie that yearns for more action and experience and adventure that she's ill-equipped for. I wouldn't say she's particularly well served by the script overall, but as a character that was added into the narrative, she's fine, even if some aspects of her role are, sadly, rather predictable. Final thoughts. Hellboy, The Crooked Man, is an odd film. Taking a popular story from the comics and then artificially extending and expanding it has a few boons and a few drawbacks. And while some of the material added works, some of it derails the narrative to an extent that at times the main story gets lost. The performances are okay, with a few being more memorable than others, but in general, while I do appreciate and admire what has been achieved here on a very small budget, the overall feeling is that the film is rather cheap and dull looking at times. And while there are a few artistic decisions here and there that earned an approving nod, there are also inexplicable horrors that have nothing to do with the story at all. For that matter, the tone veers from body horror to downright farcical sometimes, often not helped by the lackluster pace and lack of polish and the rather flat action scenes. I mean, the David Harbour film was awful, a worse Hellboy film than this, but that at least did have one very cool Del Toro-like action sequence with gargantuan Lovecraftian monsters stomping around. Hellboy the Crooked Man is just very small scale by comparison. There's nothing to really excite. It's not going to do anything to convince people that the Hellboy franchise has a future on celluloid, and honestly, it's best reserved for an idle watch on streaming. Ironically, had they cut out all the dead fluff they inserted to pad out the runtime, you would have had a much smaller budget, and what would have been a pretty decent hour of television. Told you. Thanks for watching. I've been Critical. I'll be back with another movie review soon.